Okay, there's a large hall filled with people, and this guy behind the podium starts to speak. Every generation, the Anti-Witch League rises up and defeats the witch threat. And yet every generation, new witches are born. How can this be? When will it end? My hypothesis, said John Winthrop, is that this plague will not end until we face it without fear and study it up close and personal. I think it is time for a new decision to be made. Instead of burning the witches, we should be studying them. What? Came the cry from the audience. Why? Because I believe that they may be a symptom of a much larger disease that must be investigated and uncovered. What? Whatever it is, we must know who our true enemy is. And not just be eradicating the symptom without looking deeper at the disease that underlies it. I believe if witches are allowed to form their own colony, isolated from the larger society and left alone, we will be able to use that colony like a petri dish, and we'll be able to study them and seek out new cures and treatments. Witch, came the cries from the audience. But I am a man, I am one of you. Witch. Oh well, I tried, said John. Suddenly all of the doors and windows slammed shut, unable to be opened, and there before them the audience saw Isabella, Queen of the Witches, standing behind the podium, where a brief moment before John Winthrop had stood. The audience began to transform into pigs and asses. You'll all be sold to the market for your meat, she screamed. Because this generation of witches will not be burnt at the stake. Freedom! Came the cries from the rafters up above as the sign fell from the rafters. It read, "The Anti-Witch League, Loyalty, Courage, Service." The queen had the witches gather hair and sweat was collected from the pigs and asses for the spells, and soon the leaders of the Anti-Witch League were filing out of the meeting and getting back into their limousines to return to their government and corporate positions. And they soon began dismantling the Anti-Witch League from within, and stopping the witch eradication campaign that was slowly burning its way across the heartland. This is when it was discovered that the Anti-Witch League, reported to another group that was even more secretive than the Anti-Witch League. So Isabella, Queen of the Witches, shifted her focus to learning more about this secretive group. And soon her dream monkeys were bringing back stories of vivid dreams that members of the secretive group dreams that were shared by many of the members of this group that calls itself the Return. Dreams of victorious Nazi armies sweeping out across the world. How could this be, thought Isabella. So she had witches capture one of the members of the secretive organization. Oh, it's going the wrong way. Wait a minute, hold on. His name was Felix Kolitz, and they drained him of his secrets. It was very painful. But from it we learned that the Return was a group tasked by Hitler at the fall of the Third Reich to burrow into governments and corporations around the world and to search for any time travel technology that could bring weapons of the future back in time to save Hitler and Nazi Germany. And with future weapons that will shift the tide of war in Germany's favor. The return had eyes and ears in governments and corporations all over the world. And they had reports that China had a department, something called 812, that was working on time travel. And they were prepared, and so a team was prepared to insert themselves into China and steal time. So the Queen took the hair and sweat of Franz Krauts and prepared a spell. Then said to Noah, one of her secret agents, appearance is only skin deep, but if you go further than that and take another's thoughts and memories and become that person, then the undoing spell comes with some risk. So if you were to ever want to go back to being just Nora, that might be impossible. I understand, said Noah. Then Queen embraced Noah and said, Vi con Dios mi hijo. So Noah took the potion and raised it to her lips. Then the Queen said, wait. Then the Queen mumbled something from an old tongue over the potion. And then said Noah, if you drink this, you will not only look like Felix Kalutz, you will have his memories, and subconsciously he will be fighting you. So I have given you a centering spell, so you will be the still point, free of any manipulation by any echoes of Felix floating in your subconscious. Thank you, said Noah. And then she drank the elixir. The return had allies in China, who had paved the way for them, and soon a 6-man team plus one was on its way to China. And once over 812 building, they began to jump from the plane. And just as the last man was about to jump, he froze in place. And Felix emerged from hiding and took his parachute and helmet and put them on. Then she let the man jump, and then followed right behind him to find the machine. She followed the trail of bodies to the time machine, wearing the man's helmet, and the others could not tell who was under the helmet, so Noah, pretending to be the dead man, joined the group. One of them stopped her, but she just pointed to her hearing piece and shrugged. He let her pass. The spies had told them that all of the test animals had come back to this time blind. So they kept their helmets on to shield their eyes. They landed back in 1938 and started to get off the ship when Felix kicked the last person out of the ship and time jumped. But somehow Hitler's psychic children had stopped the ship from time jumping. So Felix upped the power, and finally it jumped. When Felix got back to the present day, the witches were under attack and were being slaughtered. All is lost, said the Queen. Get in, said Felix. And they returned in 1938, as Felix told the Queen everything. I know where a witch colony existed in 1938. My mother told me about it, said Isabella. So she and Isabella went to the colony and pressed their case to the Queen and witches of this time as to why they must reveal themselves to the Allies and join in the war effort against Hitler, or else all is lost. So the witches of this time agreed, and they assembled in the town square, and the two queens prepared a spell for lightning bolts that they cast upon the witches assembled. Soon a swarm of witches were flying over Nazi armies on their brooms and hurling down lightning bolts from the heavens. The witches led the Allied armies as they moved across Europe to victory over the Nazis. But when they arrived in Berlin, Hitler and the top Nazi brass were long gone. Then Felix realized that from her still point she could still feel Hitler's psychic children would try to stop her from time jumping. So she concentrated on them, but she could not quite see them or where they were located. So she joined with the two queens, and together they could see them and where they were. It was a base in the Black Forest that no one else could see. So they pinpointed it on a map for the Allies, and the bombing began. Then, with the Queen's help, the Allies took down and disbanded the anti-witch leagues around the world, and witches were allowed to live in peace, harmony, and anonymity with the humans. The first steps of a witch-human friendship, a don't ask, don't tell type of agreement, and by order of the Allies were to be pursued, hunted, and eradicated no more. The witches invited Felix and the Queen to stay with them in their colony in this time, but Felix and the Queen declined their offer and returned home, where they found a world without witches, a world in chaos. What happened, they asked passers-by, but none knew. Then Hitler's psychic children, deformed and grotesque survivors from the bombings that took out Hitler and his top brass at the end of the Great War, sensed them and attacked. They had somehow held on and survived, knowing only the time and date that we had left our world, and so they had waited for our return in hopes of stealing the time machine and rewriting history. The Queen and Isabella were throwing lightning bolts at the forces allied against them as they fought their way back to their ship, and then just before Felix got on board the ship, she saw in her mind where Hitler's psychic children were, and she threw a lightning bolt straight down the chimney. Then instead of time jumping, they instead jumped over to China, where the Queen's cast a spell of forgetting, and everyone associated with Department 812 and the time machine forgot all about it. And then after emptying the building, the Queen and Felix destroyed it with lightning bolts. Then the Queen and Felix looked around. "They're all gone," said Felix. "We're the last of our kind." "So," said the Queen, "don't be so melodramatic. It's happened before and it'll happen again. Witches have been drowned, frozen, and burnt at the stake. We're indestructible because we are the change, and it cannot be stopped. So in 20 years there will be a new generation of witches walking the earth, and we will be there this time to make sure of their success in leading humanity forward." So then the Queen cast a spell, and the time machine moved 1 second outside of time, to remain there until a witch said the lost and found spell, while burning witch wood in an open field. Felix never returned back to Noah, never turned back into Noah, and so she and the Queen lived a good life, waiting for the next generations to arrive, witches to arrive. The end. Thank you.